Um, they would hand out leaflets with very graphic images of violence. For example, if somebody shows you an image of a dead child, you don't look at that from a rational lens because it is something so shocking. For example, if somebody shows you a picture of a flying car, you go, that's not real. Where is that from? And you ask questions. If you see an image of a dead child, your brain doesn't go through that same process because it is something so shocking. So they take that emotion of feeling hurt and upset, and then they give you somebody to outlet that anger, turn it into anger, and who's to blame. And in most cases, it was Israel. There was this disproportionate obsession with Israel. So you'd be given an image of a dead child and a caption such as, this child was killed by the Israelis because she was an Arab, because she was Palestinian, so on and so forth. Now the issue with that is, and we've seen this in the last few conflicts that Israel has been involved in, you have images that go on Twitter, on Facebook, are shared thousands of times, and then it turns out that it's actually from Syria and nothing to do with Israel. People lie, shockingly. So again, you were seeing this extremism really grow, but again, it was in the background. I didn't really make that jump to it. What changed for me started in 2000. In 2000, I went to Pakistan to visit family. And where my family are from in Pakistan is very kind of, boring, I guess. There's mountains, there's trees, and that's kind of the fun stuff. But wherever I went, I was confronted for the first time with an actual terrorist group. I'm not even going to say extremists, an actual terrorist group who are very open and very direct about being violent and using terrorism as an ideal. This group, Lashkar-e-Taiba, they still exist today, are a Pakistani-based terrorist group, most notorious in the West for the Mumbai attacks in India a number of years ago. And their images, their imagery, their kind of rhetoric is very violent. It's about destroying nations, about to bringing about an Islamic caliphate over the whole world, much of what ISIS is doing today. This is 2000. And their imagery was very kind of powerful. Images of the Israeli, the American, the Indian flag on fire, captions such as destroy the enemies of Islam. Now, if you look at that rationally, you'll think these people are crazy, because it's very aggressive, very violent, kind of insane. But without even realizing, for the last 16 years, those messages I'd been hearing had actually taken root. The idea that the Jews are evil, the idea that Americans can't be trusted, the idea that I am a victim. And that was the most dangerous and most powerful message that I'd absorbed without realizing. I believed I was a victim. So instead of looking at a terrorist organization that are killing innocent people and thinking this is wrong, you make excuses. You go, well, it's kind of wrong, but then when you look at what America and Israel do, you can understand. So it goes from being terrorism to resistance, and it goes from resistance to fighting back. And it becomes almost empowering. Instead of being disgusting or abhorrent, which violence and terrorism is, it resonates. So when I went back to the UK, I started looking into Lashkar-e-Taiba and associated kind of ideologies. And they follow a stream of Islam which is primarily propagated by Saudi Arabia, our great ally, which is very intolerant and very black and white. Basically, it's us versus them. And them is anybody who doesn't believe in their form of Islam. If you do not believe in their particular brand of Islam, you're seen as an enemy, and that includes other Muslims. But it resonated. It was very clear. It resonated because it gave a sense of empowerment. And something I noticed very quickly with all of these extremist groups, Islam splits into two major groups, but even within that there are subgroups, Sunni and Shia. Within both of those groups, the extremist organizations, Sunni such as Hamas, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Lashkar-e-Taiba, Shia, Hezbollah, the Mahdi army, the Iranian government today, they all agree on two things. One, they hate each other, fair enough, and the other, which is the more pressing, is they see no place for Israel or the Jews in the world. They have to be eliminated. And that comes from a number of things. I have a few theories on that. One of the things I think is theological. Islam doesn't see itself as a new religion. It sees itself as a continuation of religions that were corrupted. So from an Islamic viewpoint, the message of Judaism came first, it was corrupted, then Christianity came, it was corrupted, and then Muhammad came as the final prophet to correct everything. So for that to actually hold any weight, it doesn't when you have the Jewish people thriving and living in their homeland. It causes a lot of theological issues for some people. The other reason is purely because Israel is a democratic state. Israel is a democratic state. It represents freedoms. And that's an issue for many people in the Middle East, in the Muslim world, who don't want freedom, don't respect democracy, and believe in very extreme forms of totalitarian rule. But again, look, I grew up hearing how evil the Jews were, so it kind of stuck. But there were two things which happened which took me from being very extreme in what I believed to being an activist and almost taking it further. The first of those things was 9/11. When 9/11 happened, it put me in a bit of a moral quandary, because on the one hand, you can't escape the evil of planes hitting buildings, people jumping from the 100th floor. You can't escape that. You're seeing it on TV. And what I did, which was, again, really dangerous, I saw that. I thought it was awful. But I dropped into that victim mentality when I went, yes, it's bad, but when you see what America does, maybe they had it coming. Maybe you can understand why it happened, which is disgusting. How can you understand 3,000 people being murdered going to work one morning? And the other thing you had around that time, which was really strange, so when people try to explain terrorism in the West, we look for rational reasons. We need to find a reason why. There has to be a rational reason. So a lot of the reasons we hear is it's to do with poverty and all these things, which 90%, 95% of the time is complete rubbish. They couldn't use that argument because most of the hijackers were from Saudi Arabia, which is one of the most richest, wealthiest countries on earth. So what you heard from a lot of sources, I mean, former US presidents, former members of the government, had this idea that it was because of America's foreign policy, primarily America's support for the State of Israel, which was a motivation for 9/11, which is completely ridiculous. Firstly, intellectually, it completely ignores why Al-Qaeda was formed. Al-Qaeda's formation after the Soviet-Afghan War had nothing to do with Israel, shockingly for a change. But it was completely based on American troops being in Saudi Arabia after the first Gulf War. So it completely ignored that. And also it was just ridiculous. Because America supports the only democratic nation in the Middle East, it deserves terrorism. But that idea gained traction. It really did. And you heard it, and you still hear it repeated today. And in the UK, you had an anti-war movement which really gained a lot of momentum, and that anti-war movement quickly turned into an anti-Israel movement. But for me, the single most significant factor of my radicalization was going to university. And I went to a British university. I went to the University of Nottingham-Trent. And from day one, you are bombarded with anti-Israel messages. There is a disproportionate obsession with the State of Israel. And I see that on US campuses. I talk at US campuses now quite regularly, and I've had everything from near riots happen. Because it's a disproportionate obsession. Anything can happen in the world. Syria, Assad can be killing hundreds of thousands of people. Pakistan could be burning Christians alive. ISIS could be wiping out Yazidis. All of that comes second to this obsession with hating Israel. And I'll give you an example. Look, very early on when I was at university, there was an event held, and I went to this event, and we all played a video for 20 minutes. This video had no explanation, no text, no narration, and it was basically 20 minutes of very graphic images from the Middle East. Images of people at checkpoints, people with limbs missing. It wasn't pleasant, but there's no context to it. And it ends with the caption, "What are you doing for your brothers and sisters in Palestine?" 20 minutes of very powerful, very emotional propaganda, and that's all you have as a context. So I watched this and went away from it thinking this is nothing new. You know, I've seen this before, but for a lot of people it was their first kind of exposure. Now you can argue, how does 20 minutes impact on anyone? So a few years later, my cousin was going to the same university. She has zero interest in politics, the Middle East, religion, anything like that. So she knocks on my door and is really annoyed and is ranting and raving. How can you support Israel? They kill babies, blah, blah, blah. I go, look, what are you talking about? Because it's a conversation we'd never had. She goes, I watched this video and it showed all the... Oh, okay, look, stop. Look, come in, let me make a cup of tea, let's discuss this. I'm very British. You have a crisis, you make a cup of tea. It's the only way things work. Actually, I'll tell you a little story, slightly digress. And this is actual history. You may have heard a different version of events. So many years ago, the British voluntarily left America. And it's true. And the main reason, as you all know, was the Boston Tea Party. Because the minute you destroy good tea, we realized, these Americans, we can't really work with this. All right, you guys crossed the line. We all left voluntarily, and now we're best friends. And that's what happened. So we discussed it, and I went, look, it's not that simple. It's not that clear cut. But 20 minutes of very powerful propaganda had affected her. So when I was at university, I became very active in the anti-Israel movement, because that's what it is. You know, they call themselves Students for Justice in Palestine, Palestine Solidarity Campaign. They're not pro-Palestinian, they're anti-Israeli. It's just the way it is. If they really cared about Palestinian rights, they would be speaking up against Hamas or Fatah, who take millions of dollars, who commit human rights abuses every day, but they don't. Their obsession is boycotting Israel, demonizing Israel. So I was very active in that. I was handing out leaflets. Israel is an apartheid state. Israel is eating panda bears. Because the truth doesn't matter. When you're trying to make somebody look bad, you're not really worrying about the truth. But I got to this point when I was at university when I thought, what am I actually achieving? Handing out leaflets, that's not going to change the world. So for me, I mean, sadly it's true today still. But what makes an impact greater than anything else right now, which really captures the world's attention, is sadly terrorism. We saw that with Paris, we're seeing that in Israel today. So I thought the best thing for me to do is go back to Pakistan, I will go to a terrorist training camp, and then I will do whatever's kind of necessary. So I was making plans, talking to the relevant people, going back to Pakistan to go to a terrorist training camp. Obviously that didn't happen, or this would be really strange. I'd probably still be in the TSA, actually. And what changed started with me coming across a book called The Case for Israel. So at this point in my life, I believe I'm an expert in the Middle East. I know everything about Israel, and it's this horrible place. So I see this book, and I think, who's written a book called The Case for Israel? For me, Israel was like the Nazis. It was the very worst thing on earth. So I couldn't understand why anybody would write a case for it. So I pick up this book and think, you know what, I'm going to read it just to see the lies which are being told and see how false what they're telling is. So I start reading it, and this book makes some, for me, crazy claims. The author, Alan Dershowitz, says, well, there's been a Jewish presence in the Holy Land for over 2,000 years. You know, it's mentioned in the Torah numerous times. It's not mentioned in the Quran once, Jerusalem. I thought, okay, that's strange. And then because for me, I had been constantly taught that Israel, what's Israel now, was an Arab state. The Jews came from Europe, stole the land. Okay, that was the narrative. And he talks about Israel being democratic. He talks about Israel's war of independence, how the Israelis rejoiced, the Arab states went to war, and all these things. And this was kind of the complete opposite of what I believed. And he talks about freedom of religion, Israel's a free state, gender equality, all these things. So I thought, okay, these are lies. This is so far from the truth. Insane. So this I can disprove very easily. And the case for Israel is very well written, because everything has a source. Every argument he makes, lawyers here, you know, what can you do? Everything he writes is well sourced. So I buy the book which was written as a counter-argument to the case for Israel. And it relied on a lot of very emotional arguments, but no actual facts. You know, it talks about these, and his brother's grandfather's mother's uncle walked across the desert with one leg and said this is Palestine, but there was no factual evidence other than he said it happened, you know? So I thought, okay, that's not helping me at all. So I thought, it's fine, I can disprove this. So a few weeks went by, I was reading a lot of different materials. Eventually 2 years went by with me obsessively researching the Middle East. 2 years is a long time, granted. But when you obsessively hate something, or when you're obsessed generally, when you are obsessed with something, you can't read one book and go, you know, I was at a point where I was happy to kill Israelis. I was at a point where when there was suicide attacks, suicide terrorism in Israel, I didn't see anything wrong with it. So you don't read one book and go, got it wrong, what do you know? So I had to reaffirm what I believed. So I carried on researching, and after 2 years, I was at this point where I couldn't comprehensively disprove what I was reading and what I believed didn't seem to be right, but I still couldn't give that up. So I thought, and in those 2 years a lot had happened. There was a distance between me and my friends because I wasn't sure how I felt, and also I'd suffered from bouts of depression because it's very difficult to reconcile what you've believed for almost all your adult life, and there's no real truth to it, but it's not something I was willing to give up. So I decided that the only way I'm going to find the truth is if I go to Israel. I'll go to Israel, and it will be this awful place, and I can say, you know what, I knew it. You know, they'll see my passport, you've got a Muslim name, I'll be beaten up, and it'll be fine. So in 2007, I went from London Heathrow to Tel Aviv. Now, we have in the UK the Home Office, which is similar to the State Department, and they obviously give travel advice. And whenever you read any travel advice about Israel, it's heightened security situation, and so always be honest. So I think fine. So I end up in Tel Aviv, and if you've ever been to Israel, you have these really cheerful people in the passport control booths. What is the purpose of your visit to Israel? Okay. Nice to be here. I'll be honest. So I used to be anti-Semitic and anti-Israel. Now I'm not so sure, so I thought I'd come and see it for myself. Long awkward silence, a little bit like that. And they go, okay, look, you're going to have to take a seat. And that was the start of my 8 hours at Ben Gurion Airport in security. Wasn't a bad experience, and I will come back to that. The other thing I didn't realize, so a few years before I went to Israel, there was a terror attack in Tel Aviv at a place called Mike's, a bar called Mike's Place. I didn't realize that those attackers had come from Derby, which is a city right next to Nottingham. So obviously they've got that they're dealing with, and then here I come, hey, I'm anti-Semitic. So, you know, not something I'd realized at the time. So I'm in security, and the guy from security comes, and we're talking, and he goes, look, it's very strange what you're telling us, and going back and forth. And then he looks through my passport, and it's completely empty, because it was only 2 months old. And he goes, look, if Israel is the first country you visited from the UK, it's a little bit suspicious. You have to understand that. And I go, look, if you look at the validity, it's 2 months old. And he goes, okay, so where have you been in the last 10 years? I go, Pakistan. He goes, okay, why? You know, family, you can't choose your family, you know how it is. I goes, okay, fair enough, I can understand that. He goes, where else have you been? Saudi Arabia. He goes, okay, I'll be right back, and he walks out. So like I said, it wasn't a bad experience, because I went to Saudi Arabia as a religious pilgrim. I've got to be honest, so I've been to parts of Europe, Hungary, Lithuania, where looking like this isn't a good idea. When you're brown, it's probably going to go down, as they say. So I've experienced racism. I'm going to be very honest. But I've never to this day experienced the level of racism I saw in Saudi Arabia anywhere in the world. Genuinely. Firstly, within kind of the Muslim community, if you are not an Arab and the darker your skin, you're going to have problems in Saudi Arabia. People are going to be very openly racist to you, and that's sadly just a fact. Also, if you're not a non-Muslim, firstly, you can't practice your religion in public, it's against the law. Secondly, there are certain areas and certain cities you can't enter. Then further, if you're the wrong kind of Muslim, you're going to get harassed by the religious police. So I had that kind of awful experience. And here I am in Israel, this place which I think is awful. The guy was, look, 8 hours is a long time, but he was very polite, he was very apologetic. And then, so, you know, like in American TV shows, you have good cop, bad cop. So this guy did good cop, Jewish mother. So it went from, so where are you going? I'm going to go to Jerusalem. Where are you going to go to Jerusalem? I don't know, I'll probably go to the Dome of the Rock, the Western Wall. He goes, okay, so would you like something to eat? No, I'm good. No, you need to eat something, you know, you've been here for a few hours. No, dude, honestly, I'm good. No, look, I'll get you something to eat. It's fine. Dude, honestly, I'm good. Okay, fine. I'll get you something to eat. Anyway, it's fine. Don't worry about it. So it was a strange experience in that kind of respect. So anyway, so eventually I was allowed to go, get my passport, and I go to Jerusalem first. Jerusalem was my first stop. So when you look, you constantly hear Israel's an apartheid state. On every campus, they even have Israel Apartheid Week. So I was thinking, okay, I'm going to see this apartheid. I'm going to see a separation between Jews and non-Jews. I'm going to see open discrimination. And if you ever go to Jerusalem, look, of course you don't see Arab-only bus stops or any of that. You know, you see all the signs in English, Hebrew, and Arabic, and you just see the craziest mix of people. So 2 trips ago when I was in Israel, this for me really typifies Israel. I'm walking down Jaffa Street, and at the train stop there, I see a group of people standing together. And look, I have never seen, and I don't think I'll ever see this group of people standing together anywhere else in the world. So there's a soldier, fairly conventional in Israel. There's an ultra-Orthodox Jewish man, black hat, curls. Okay, fair enough again. It's Israel. There's a Muslim woman with a headscarf. Okay. There's a Greek Orthodox priest, big hat on, big cross. I think, okay, this is turning into a bit of a joke here. And then there was a guy with green hair and like 5 piercings in his ear. It's like there's nowhere else on the planet these people would be in the same place at the same time. It just wouldn't happen. But on my first trip to Israel, I made an effort to talk to people, because I wasn't even... Look, it takes a really special type of arrogant person to not see something with their own eyes and still deny it. And that was me. So I thought, okay, let me talk to people. I'm going to find out. This place has to be bad. I know it. So I talked to people. I spoke to people, Jewish, Israeli Arabs who were Christian, Muslims. I spoke to atheists. And it was almost the same thing I was hearing. Is Israel perfect? There's no such thing as a perfect country. Okay? It just doesn't exist. But this is our home. Look, there are problems like everywhere. Apparently cheese is too expensive. That's a thing. I have no idea what that's about, but it's a thing. But it's like any other country. People are trying to get on with their lives. And I felt no hatred. You know, for years I'd had this idea that Israelis are anti-Arab, anti-Muslim, and I had felt no hatred at all. People were very warm. And even hearing from Israeli Arabs and Israeli Druze who are non-Jewish talking about how proud they are of their country and how they served in the IDF, and that, again, was just mind-blowing for me. So after a few hours, I thought, okay, this is a lot to take in. I don't know how I feel about this. So I thought, let me be a tourist. You know, when you're in Jerusalem, you go to the Old City. It's what you do. So I went to the Old City, and I went to the Church of the Sepulchre. I went to the Temple Mount. And I'm walking towards the Western Wall, thinking, what on earth am I doing? Like, seriously. Firstly, I didn't think I'd be allowed near the Western Wall. In Saudi Arabia, if you're not Muslim, you can't even go into the holy cities. So I go past the metal detectors, no issues. So I'm walking towards the Western Wall thinking, what am I going to do? Pray? Rub the stones? I have no clue. So here's the issue. I think I'm 23, 24 at the time. I'm walking towards the Western Wall. I know a little bit about Judaism, very basics at that point. I know what the Western Wall is. The one thing I wasn't prepared for was the Chabad emissary with tefillin. I had no idea what that was. I was like, I have no idea what this dude's trying to sell me, but I'm good. I'm going to pass. So I'm at the Western Wall, and something I've learned as I've got older, if you're in a situation and you don't know what to do, copy the person next to you. Guide his arm on the wall, if I can do that. It's easy enough. And not to be cliche about it, but this is reality. Eventually my forehead was on the Western Wall, and that really was for me a moment of clarity. Because it was almost like all the kind of daily noise. Look, life's noisy, okay? It just is. Even people's own thoughts are noisy. It was like I had a moment of kind of clarity and silence to really put things together. Because I thought, here I am in Israel. I'm in a Jewish state. I'm at the Western Wall, one of the holiest sites in Judaism. I've got the Israeli flag flying behind me, the white with the blue Star of David. I met people from every background, every religion, and these are people I hated. These are people I wanted to kill based on lies and hatred. So that really affected me. But what resonated even more was I thought, here I am in Israel. And no matter what happens from this point on, it's 2007. What peace agreements may happen, what conflicts may happen, there are 6 million who will never see this. There are 6 million Jews who were murdered in my continent, in Europe, who will never see the re-establishment of the Jewish home. And that really had an impact on me, because at that point it moved beyond how I was seeing it. Because I was seeing it as about land and religion, all of these things, and it moved past that, because it became about something much greater. It became about survival. It became about survival and the preservation of the single greatest story in human history, the story of the Jewish people. There is no greater story in human history than of the Jewish people, without a doubt. Because, look, the reality is, without the Jewish people, there is no Christianity, there is no Islam. That's a fact. That's not an opinion, simply a fact. Without the Jewish people, we wouldn't live in a world which values human rights. We wouldn't live in a world which values equality. Because if you look at the societies that came before the Hebrew prophets, they were the complete opposite. They weren't about looking after the sick. It wasn't about caring for the orphan. It was about the weak are left to die. Education is a privilege of the few, not belonging to everybody. War is an ideal, not peace. And it was the Hebrew prophets who completely changed the face of the world, going, no, there is a better way. But it's the Jewish people who constantly find themselves at the end of the murderous intentions of the world's lunatics. So that really resonated, especially being from a Pakistani background, because I thought, look, my grandparents fought for an independent Muslim homeland. They wanted Pakistan, they wanted to separate from India because they didn't want to be a minority at the mercy of a Hindu majority when the British left. They didn't want to be dictated to by somebody else. They wanted to be able to live by their own customs, by their own traditions, by their own beliefs. And here I am waving a Pakistani flag without any problems. Here I am supporting Pakistan, yet I'm telling the Jewish people who've had a presence for over 1400 years before the first Muslim set foot in India, you have no right to exist. I mean, it's ridiculously hypocritical and just morally wrong. But for me, that was the point where I realized how wrong I'd got it. But I had to understand it a bit more. So I went away from that. I spent another 2.5 weeks in Israel. I went to Judea, Samaria, / the West Bank, whatever you want to call it. I met with people from all different sides, all different religions. And as I was getting ready to go back to the UK, I thought, what do I do now? Do I say I got it wrong, life goes on, or do I actually speak up and go, I got it wrong, and we actually have a responsibility to stand with Israel, not demonize it? And for me, it was a simple choice. It was always the second choice, because it was the right and moral thing to do. Here you have this tiny country, and Israel is a tiny country, which is contributing more to the world per capita than any other country in the world. Science, technology, medicine, Israel is at the forefront. Whenever any country has a humanitarian disaster, the first country to respond 99% of the time is Israel. Haiti, Japan, Hurricane Sandy, Israel was there to help. Yet Israel is the only country which is constantly being treated like a pariah. It's being treated like the world's greatest criminal. From the UN, while Syria bombards its own people, Israel is the country that's being singled out. On university campuses, it has become dangerous on some campuses even to wear a pin with the Israeli flag on. It's ridiculous. So I felt a moral responsibility. Look, it's been almost, we're going on to 9 years since I went to Israel for the first time. I've been back numerous times since. And by doing this, and it literally started with me talking to friends, talking to family, just to try to make them understand. And a lot's changed in my life since then. Look, I left the UK because there were a lot of security issues for me. It became to a point where it was difficult for me just to go about my day-to-day kind of life. Every now and again, I receive death threats from people who don't use spell check. It's kind of offensive. You know, if you're going to threaten me, at least spell check. It's free. And look, I've been to campuses in the US which have turned into almost riots. It gets crazy at times. But do I regret the choice I made? Of course not. Because it was the right and moral thing to do. Because Israel is not just a Jewish issue. It is a genuine human rights issue. Defending Israel is important to anybody who supports freedom, democracy, and acceptance. Israel is the only country in the Middle East where you can be a non-Sunni Muslim or a non-Shia Muslim and it doesn't matter. You can still go on with life. And even more so from a Jewish perspective. Look, since 1945, the world has constantly said never again. To me, that phrase means nothing. Genuinely, it doesn't. Never again means nothing to the Rwandans, to the Bosnians, to the Syrians who have been massacred in genocides, because the world sat there and did nothing. But for the Jewish people, you have one guarantee of never again, and that's the State of Israel. Because the State of Israel, since its very existence, has opened its doors whenever the Jewish people have needed it. Be it from Ethiopia, be it from France, be it from the 750,000 Jews from the Middle East who were forced out of their homes, forced out of their countries, simply because Israel exists. So I felt a moral responsibility. And look, some of you are going to be going on to colleges. Some of you are going to go into colleges soon enough. It's rough out there. Genuinely, I'm not trying to scare anybody, but it is rough out there, and there is a lot of ignorance. But you have a moral responsibility to stand up. You have a moral responsibility to tell your story. You have an Israel story. Every single person, whether they've been to Israel or not, has an Israel story. There's a reason why you support Israel, why Israel is so important to you. And for you guys, look, it's an honor to speak here, because you guys understand it on a much deeper level. Israel is your home. No matter where you live, wherever you're from, as somebody who is Jewish, Israel is your home. It's the land of your forefathers. It's where it is. There's no other way to say it. It is your home. And you need to stand up for that. Look, I only left Europe a few years ago, but the situation I know is bad. Genuinely. I was talking to one of my friends a few days ago. He lives in London. He's modern Orthodox. And look, he's in his 40s, and it was really unpleasant because he was in tears because he has to tell his son, if you're going to wear a kippah, can you wear a baseball hat over it? Because I don't want anything to happen to you. It's awful. It's wrong. It's in every sense of the word. Look, you're not that far along in the US. You're not at that point now. Genuinely, you're not. It's bad, but it's not. But all it takes is for people to remain silent. If you do not speak up for Israel, if you do not speak up for your rights as a Jewish student, nobody else will. And know one thing, you are not alone. Believe me, I have a lot of Jewish friends, and I know it seems like you're alone a lot of the time, but you're not. I mean, the organization I work for, Christians United for Israel, we have 2.5 million members. We have 180 campus chapters. You're not alone. But every individual has a responsibility to stand up for Israel, because beyond anything else, it's the right thing to do. Genuinely, beyond anything else, it's the right thing to do. If you support democracy, if you support freedom, if you support acceptance, and if you support right versus wrong, if you support freedom over terrorism and aggression, support Israel. Thank you very much.